How old was Achilles during the Trojan War? And Helen? Paris? People occasionally ask these questions, especially when they're watching film adaptations of the Greek myths. How accurate is the interpretation of the screenwriters and directors? And all of this is not entirely clear from the source materials. Here's the problem. The timeline of the Trojan War is weird. Ancient authors never really paid much attention to some of the details and never tried to make things absolutely realistic. This is a mythological narrative, and first of all, a narrative that doesn't have a single source. There are versions. Some are more popular than the others, some are relatively obscure, and they may contradict each other. I've made a series, 3 parts, of YouTube videos discussing the depictions of the Trojan War in the films released in the past 20 years. And I actually address this issue a little bit and discuss all of the primary characters. Please watch the videos because why not? Okay, another obvious problem with the myths. Most of the ancient literature is lost. A significant part of the Trojan War cycle is gone. We have some information about a number of works, the synopsis, so to speak. We obviously have no information about the very existence of certain sources if they are not referenced anywhere. The main works, the key works, are here. They survived, like Homer. We know a lot, but naturally our knowledge is incomplete. So, now we're done with the necessary introduction, and we can address the current issue. There is a huge problem with the chronology of the Trojan War, if we're talking about the dominant mainstream version or the versions of the events. You know, the one that follows Homer, not the alternative versions about the Phantom Helen and stuff like that. If you do the math, Paris, Alexander, can easily be 60 years of age when he dies. It is not how he is usually presented in the movies. But that's more or less okay. That's not the main issue. The main trouble is with Neoptolemus and the age of the characters when the war is about to start. You'll see what I mean in a moment. Let's do the math together.
1 + 1 = 2! You're absolutely right,
We're starting with the marriage feast of Thetis and Peleus, the parents of Achilles. This is where we have this episode with Ares and the Apple of Discord. Achilles is probably born within a year after the marriage of his parents. The Apple of Discord episode triggers the Judgement of Paris. When does it happen? No idea. Logic implies that immediately after the feast. Yes, gods are immortal beings and their perception of time is very different, which is referenced a little bit in Homer when Odysseus talks to Athena and says something like, "Where have you been all these years?" And Athena is basically like, well, I just turned away for a couple of minutes. It is possible that it took a while for the gods to organize the Judgement of Paris, but once again, human logic kind of dictated that it all happened almost immediately after the feast. 3 goddesses ask Paris to make a choice, and you know the story. And here's the thing that's frequently overlooked by people and pretty much always by the filmmakers. Paris is more or less grown up. He's probably somewhere between 15 or 20 years of age. He's not entirely a kid. He's not a prince yet, but yeah, 15 to 20, which automatically means that he is 15 or 20 years older than Achilles. It is not, say, Peterson's Troy, where you have an adult Achilles and a boyish Paris. No, Paris is significantly older than Achilles. It is quite probable that the Judgement of Paris happens before Achilles is even born. Now, fast forward to the first year of the Trojan War. We know that Achilles is participating in the war since day one. That makes him at least 20 years of age. Okay, maybe 15. A 15-year-old could go to war, but it is unlikely and very unrealistic that a guy could be a great warrior at this age. He's not properly developed physically and doesn't have enough experience. So, okay, 15 to 20 range. At least 15 to 20. Paris is at least 30 when the war begins, and more likely he's around 40. And now we have the most problematic character. It's Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, who is never in the movies. But he's in the Iliad and the surrounding myths. How old is he when the war begins? It is really hard to say, and any answer might actually contradict other events, and in the end, it will collapse any realistic timeline. So let's fast forward to the 10th year of war. Neoptolemus is a grown-up man, meaning at least 15, probably older, 18 to 20. He definitely doesn't act like he's 15. I'd say 20 is much more realistic. That means that Neoptolemus was born at least 5 years before the war, and possibly even 10 years before the war, which has certain implications which we will discuss shortly, once we're finished with the main characters. So yeah, Achilles has a grown-up son in the 10th year of war, and realistically, Achilles dies when he is somewhere between 30 and 40 years of age. And 40 is actually more realistic. Which instantly makes Paris at least 45. That's the absolute minimum. More realistically, he's something like 55 or even 60. He's basically an old man. And that is not how he presented in the Iliad. That fact alone is kind of problematic. And now let's go back in time once again and see how the timeline collapses. There's a gap of at least 20 years between the marriage of Thetis and Peleus and the start of the war. This gap has the events like the Judgement of Paris, marriage of Helen, abduction of Helen, Achilles hiding on Scyros, and the birth of Neoptolemus. When the suitors arrive at the court of Tyndareus to compete for Helen, how many years before the war? Hard to say, but it is usually assumed that Hermione, Helen's daughter, was something like 9 or 10 when her mother ran away with Paris. The problem here is that we don't really know how much time has passed between the abduction of Helen and the start of war. It could be years. They didn't go to war the next day. They had to recruit Odysseus, then Odysseus had to go and find Achilles. They gather forces, they have the episode at Aulis. It all takes time. We must also point out that later Hermione was married to Neoptolemus, so it is quite probable that they were more or less of comparable age. That would be slightly weird for a Greek myth if Hermione was actually like 10 years older than Neoptolemus. That makes the date of birth of Neoptolemus of -10 before the war more likely than, say, -5. Achilles obviously wasn't among the suitors of Helen, because he was too young. He is never mentioned as one of the suitors in the myths. But Patroclus was one of the suitors, which seriously contradicts the established movie narrative where Patroclus is usually portrayed as a young protege of Achilles. He's probably at least 10 years older than Achilles. He's not a kid from Peterson's Troy. He is at the very least around 40 when he's killed by Hector. How old is Helen? It is unclear. If she is married at the age of, say, 15, she leaves Menelaus when Hermione is supposedly 9 or 10. So Helen is 25. If the war begins almost immediately, she's 35 by the end of the war. If the gap between the abduction and the war is significant, then she is older. Okay, Helen is gone. Odysseus goes to Skyros to get Achilles. This is when it all starts to fall apart. How much time has passed since the moment Odysseus takes Achilles from Skyros to the start of the war? 1 month? 1 year? 10 years? If they go to war almost immediately, Neoptolemus can't be an infant because he is all grown up during the 10th year of war. He can't be like 12 during the sack of Troy. What if he was born 5 years before the war? How old was Achilles when he conceived him? Neoptolemus just kind of destroys the timeline. Because if he is at least 15, or more likely 20, by the end of the war, that means that the gap between the abduction of Helen and the war is at least 5 or more likely 10 years. Which makes all of this Trojan campaign a bit stupid. And also potentially adds more and more years to the age of the characters. And the age of some of them becomes unreasonable. Paris is the most prominent example. You might argue that Helen's Suitors episode could happen before the wedding feast of Peleus. That would fix the timeline. But no, it happened after, because otherwise it makes certain characters really old. That basically makes Patroclus more than 15 years older than Achilles, and most of the Trojan heroes are people well into their 40s during the war. We get even more weird stuff if we look beyond the sack of Troy. How old is Odysseus when he gets back home? He is older than Achilles and probably older than Patroclus. That makes him older than 50 at the time of his reunion with the family. So, in the end, as you can see, we're dealing with mythology, different sources, traditions, versions, and in the end, problematic narrative. The authors just don't care about stuff like the age of the characters. As in this example with Paris, who's never presented in the Iliad as a man well in his 50s, despite the fact that the guy is significantly older than Achilles. He could easily be like a grandfather of Neoptolemus. He's probably older than his own father, Priam. Just kidding. All of this is quite understandable, but yeah, very, very, very amusing, and makes, say, any film or stage adaptation a challenge when you have to significantly alter the source material to make stuff, believable.
I am troubled.
If you have a narrative that is mostly well thought out, probably it comes from one source. But Greek myths come from different sources, different regional traditions, different interpretations, and different time periods. So, in a way, when you have something like Norse mythology, you might have an impression that it was essentially created a couple of 100 years ago by a small number of authors who tried to create a national epic cycle, because the governments recently discovered the concept of nationalism, and now the countries really need long and glorious history, wonderful ancient literature, and other cultural accomplishments. I bet you never expected that the video about the Trojan heroes will somehow end with a sneaky attack on the authenticity of their Norse mythological literature. That's alright, I'm not entirely serious. I don't care about barbarian literature that much. Don't forget to subscribe. And share, like, comment, all that stuff. And see you soon.